Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next session. So, God's with Joseph in Genesis 39, but my title here is A Glimpse of What the Fulfillment of Israel's Destiny Looks Like, because that's essentially what we have by the conclusion of the Joseph story right before he dies. So, the central column here is to outline what we're essentially trying to unpack here on the opposite sides of the screen here. So, Joseph's journey fulfills the Abrahamic blessing in part. Now, we need to back up just a bit. We need to remember that we are told in Genesis 3:15, a seed of the woman will come forth. And Joseph, of course, is a son of Eve by virtue of the fact these genealogies and Genesis provided for us linking the stories is to carry us to this particular moment where now we have a central key figure in the story where weird things are happening and we're wondering what's going to become of it. The tension of the story as Joseph is introduced to us, not at the moment of his birth so much, but now that he's becoming a part of the story and a role to play within it. So he, of course, has a mandate, just like every other child of Abraham, to fulfill this mission one of blessing all the families of the earth. Yahweh gives Joseph dreams of kingship over Israel's seed. This comes to us in Genesis 37, right? But now, of course, this doubles back to the concept of Genesis 3:15 because we should be asking the question, if we were reading this for the first time, is he the one? Right? We shouldn't be thinking, well, we already know he has a significant role to play and he's a special person, but clearly Jesus is the one who is the fulfillment, the endpoint of all this. Yes, of course, absolutely, no doubt about that. But why is Joseph shown these dreams? And better yet, we get to the point where at this particular moment, we get to this question of what about the means? Because there is no means to the end that's ever revealed, at least by the first step of this. And the first step happens to be after these dreams, Joseph's enslaved. So first he's given two different sets of dreams showing he's going to become king somehow and someday, and he will exercise lordship over his own kin. Have no idea that it's going to happen over the rest of humanity as well, at least as far as the rest of humanity in this little niche of the world is concerned. But the very movement after this is Joseph's enslavement at the hands of his brothers, right? But we have to appreciate the fact that as we go to the left side of the screen here, that the seed of the woman who's supposed to come forth in Genesis 3:15 is supposed to solve a major existential crisis. That's also pointed out in Genesis 3:15, ending the seed of the serpent, right? And this, of course, will be the end of Edenic exile because that's what's promised in Genesis 12. Eventually, everybody's going to get to come back because they'll find blessing through Abraham's seed. And the seed of the woman will rule over all of Yahweh's creation. Joseph seems to be a fulfillment of this. He follows Yahweh's plan eventually to store food and save the world from this famine or death that everyone is consigned to, because as we find out as the story develops, it's not just Egypt, it's everybody around Egypt, which creates the context for his brothers to eventually find their way there. Now, going back to Joseph's enslavement, he winds up coming into Potiphar's house, and there he blesses Potiphar's house just by virtue of the fact Potiphar trusts Joseph, and because he blesses Joseph with trust and privilege, then Potiphar's house becomes blessed exponentially so. And then eventually, when he is cast out of Potiphar's house because of false accusation, he goes to jail. But the jailer also blesses Joseph with trust, and everything that happens is a benefit to the jailer because God blesses all the work of Joseph's hand. And then eventually, Pharaoh blesses Joseph with even greater trust, and by virtue of that, Yahweh blesses Egypt and all the nations because of this existential crisis solved by virtue of God's plan. Peoples from within Egypt and without Egypt come to find refuge with Yahweh's people who eventually migrate down into Egypt. And so Joseph becomes second to Pharaoh only in the throne of Egypt, but he rules over all of its people. So here's what you get. The snapshot at the end of the story is God's man ruling over God's people through Abraham and the descent of the generations after him that are now migrating into Egypt and are going to be blessed with the fat part or the best part of the land. But now as the famine has gotten worse, because that's only year 2 of the famine, as more of them are coming into the land from outside of Egypt, and those citizens who are living in Egypt and are literally losing everything, all their wealth, all their possessions, and literally their bodies over to the service of Pharaoh, they are unified as one kingdom, but not to be treated tyrannically. They are continuously given seed, 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 grain to live off of, And we don't have a story of anyone dying of starvation in Egypt's territory or even the surrounding lands that are also blessed from Egypt's bounty. And so God's man rules not only over God's people, but also the nations centered in the land where they are being blessed simultaneously with each other. This becomes the blueprint for what God is going to do and how he's going to fulfill mission one through the nation he is growing in its conception stage. It's not even at the infantile stage yet because it's only 70 plus that have migrated into Egypt at this point, and they are going to grow into a strong nation of hundreds of thousands in the future. But again, not there yet. So he's giving them a glimpse of what the plan looks like so that when they do leave this land, when things turn sour and they are enslaved, they know what the mandate is and how it's to look at some point in the future and what they are striving towards goal wise. So hopefully that's helpful. And I look forward to seeing you in our last and final lesson.